is it that children are doing when they're playing? And then from there, I looked at what are they doing in different cultures? How does play evidence itself? I looked at 7 different countries. Actually, I looked at, well, countries or continents. I actually looked at the whole of Africa, pretty much, which to generalize is a difficult thing, but that's what I did. I also looked at Italy, Taiwan, an island, a Polynesian island, Japan, India, and then the United States is what I used for that portion. And then I also looked at how does children's play evidence itself in different situations, such as how does it look in orphanages, hospitals, concentration camps. There was actually a lot of data about that. And then also in current refugee camps, how does play evidence itself there. And then finally, I ended my paper with a discussion of play as a form of, let's say, just psychotherapy in the school of Viktor Frankl, who conceptualized the school of logotherapy. So I discussed play as a means of logotherapeutic intervention. So just to begin with, this is a statement from the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Child from 1959, which stated, "Mankind owes its children the best it has to give." And at this state, this is one of the biggest things that we as a society are faced with. How do we provide children with the opportunity to become healthy societal members so they can contribute and benefit all of us? Because that's really one of the things I found throughout my study, was that allowing children access to play really can benefit our entire society, not just the individual child. So this is taken from the works of Stephen Tudge in his book Everyday Lives, the Personal Lives of Children, and he identified 4 activities of interest in the lives of children, which he described these activities are basically, these are what take up virtually every waking moment of a child's life, and they can include conversation, lessons, work, and play. And just to briefly define those, conversation is sustained language interactions, and these can happen between peers, between adult and child. This is very important in their development. Lessons are purposeful and overt imparting of knowledge, skills, beliefs, or values, and this often happens between adults and children, but it can also happen on a peer-to-peer basis. And then work is activity not directed by the child, and this is often, as you could imagine, adult-to-child interaction. And then play is activity chosen by the child. And these are just loose, broad definitions of what he observed. And the one that I'm going to most closely look at, as I explained, is play, because I don't think this really gets to the heart of what exactly is play. For instance, he saw, as Tudge in his work saw something that we've probably all seen, which is play work. And this is when children start to engage in play that mimics or aids adult work. And this evidences itself very differently depending on culture. For instance, in Africa, you could find a 2- or 3-year-old child goat herding virtually autonomously by itself. Whereas in a middle-class home in America, you might find a child carrying in a bag of bread from a grocery store, and both of these would qualify under that play work category. So this gives the common perception that play is the work of children. For me, that is a limited definition, and from my study I found that that does not go far enough to explain what is happening in a child when they play. So just to get an idea, to explore this idea of what is play even further, I looked at it from the views of different disciplines. And there's quite a lot of research in each field on what is play, which to me indicates the importance of it. So from an anthropological standpoint, play has been seen as informal training for adult life, games or physical activities, expressions of the self, or miscellaneous diversions. And for a long time, this was actually the common thought, was that play was just something children did to pass the time. And studies have shown that this is a very limited and inaccurate view of what play is. From a psychological standpoint, play could be viewed as a way of coping with emotions and exerting representational control over situations over which they have no control. And I do feel this is limited as well, but there is some merit in it, especially when I looked at the situations of children in difficult situations, such as war or orphanages. They oftentimes engage in play that does help them, seem to help them work through what's going on. For instance, in a study of children right after the Pearl Harbor incident in 1944, they did a study of the children who had been living on base, and they found that they were very often engaged in making toy planes and stuff like that and it seemed to be helping them cope with what had happened. Now, from a sociological standpoint, drawing on the works of Lev Vygotsky, who posited the sociocultural theory, many people in sociological field view play as a means of transmission of values, behaviors, and skills through interactions with more or less skilled societal members. And I believe this has great merit, and it goes hand in hand kind of with the child developmental view of play, which this is a quote from Block, which kind of sums it up. And from a child developmental standpoint, play is consciously patterned ways in which children relate to and experiment with their social and physical environment and their own abilities. And this is drawn heavily from the work of Jean Piaget, who did much work with children and has greatly expanded the child developmental field. Now, once again, what is play? This is a quote that I love, and this is from Marcy Gutemi, and this is from her 1992. In 1992, she appeared before the UN to give a presentation asking the UN to make even further declarations about the rights of children to play. And she said, play defies definition. Play helps children develop physically, emotionally, socially, and intellectually. Play is a means of learning about life itself. Now, if we look at those four areas, physically, emotionally, socially, intellectually, and I would even add spiritually, play helps children to develop in those areas. That is every area of a developing human. So what I found is that play can aid the development of every single aspect of a child. So we should let them do it as much and encourage them to do it as much as we can. So play is a means of experimenting with the self, society, and reality. And one thing that's interesting in play is that children can take on the roles of other children, of adults. They can defy societal conventions in a safe manner that they won't get told, no, you can't do that. And this greatly helps the development. And so just to elaborate a little bit specifically, how can play, because oftentimes people will say, well, play is good for children, but it doesn't really matter later in adult life. I can show you, using various sociological theories, that play, in fact, does increase the likelihood that a human will have greater success later in life. So just follow me through with this as we begin. So if we start at the top with just children's play, that helps to develop what Jean Piaget determined was the symbolic function, which, to briefly define that, that is a human's ability to store reality in mental constructs. And so he observed the symbolic functioning as developing between 12 and 18 months old. And as a child plays, they greatly increase that symbolic function. Now, the symbolic function allows the development of an adult ability, which C. Wright Mills identified as the sociological imagination. And the sociological imagination is the ability to understand yourself within the confines of your temporal and physical reality. So basically, that's a way of understanding yourself. Like, for instance, we oftentimes talk about America as being a post-9/11 world right now. So if you have the ability of this sociological imagination, you understand what that means. You understand that that means that you're living in a world where we have the Patriot Act, where we have certain ideas about what is war, what is right. And so that ability, that sociological imagination, is only possible with the symbolic function, which play helps develop. Now, this is to draw from Victor Turner, an anthropologist. He described in his studies of culture, he found that people go through what he termed liminal moments. And these are spaces at which you go from what I was and become what I will be. These are things like graduations, marriages, birth of children. And they're kind of like life transitions, which leads us into Nancy Schossenberg's transition theory, which states that a human's ability to navigate life's transitions can lead to greater success in life. So I propose that play develops the symbolic function, which helps the sociological imagination, which helps you to navigate life's transitions, which can lead to greater success in life. So just to sum up, play leads to greater success in life. And this is a quote from, in 1990, a panel of representatives from 15 different countries met to discuss play, what is it, how important it is, and they came from around the world. Places like Africa were represented, countries in Europe were represented, and the United States was represented. And from that conference, they developed 6 key points about what is play. And this was their fifth point, which says the call for the child's right to play is not just for the sake of today's children, it is the means through which they will be able to form a better society for all human beings in the future. And this goes back to what I was saying, that play is not just for the individual child, it's for all of us. When we allow children access to playful activities, we can increase not just their success, but our societal, we can have societal betterment, excuse me. And as I was going through my study, I found, this is also from Marcy Goudemi in her presentation to the United Nations in 1992, she identified 5 factors that are eroding children's opportunities for play throughout the world. And these factors are poverty, changing cultural values, television, inadequate environmental planning, such as populations grow, we are not putting enough effort into making sure there are parks available and things like that where children can go and actually just engage in playful activity. And then a fifth component of eroding play is an emphasis on intellectual development. And pretty much all of these, to a certain degree, evidence itself in all cultures, with certain factors taking the forefront in the erosion depending on what culture we're looking at. So as I was looking at the different cultures, I focused on 5 different areas to examine what is play within that culture. So I looked at the socio-cultural influences on the child, such as the religious beliefs around it, the government structure, those types of things. I also looked at the societal view of the child, the cultural understanding of play, the playgroup elements, such as how many are in a playgroup, to what degree are they supervised, those kinds of things. And then finally I looked at the use of objects in play. Now, this use of objects in play was one of the most greatly varying that I found, but one of the commonalities was that children do like to use objects. They will in fact play with garbage so that they can have a toy, which is very interesting to me. So now briefly, I'd just like to take us on a quick tour across the globe looking at the way that play looks in different countries. We'll start in Japan, which as I was looking at the way that the Japanese culture has supported play in their children, it's actually quite beautiful. Starting in the late 1800s, actually, there were many child developmental theorists in Japan who were actively creating kindergartens, preschools that were built around this idea that children deserve play. So here's a quote from a Japanese poem that says, "Born to play with each other, romping to play with each other. If I hear the shout of joy of children, only then is my heart touched to move myself." Now, this quote kind of sums up what I found to be kind of like the Japanese view of the child. You know, they kind of view it as, you let children develop, this is a point I'll keep coming back to, not just for the sake of the child, but for the sake of everyone, because they really enjoy seeing the child come into its own. And the adults in their society actually gain a great deal from interacting with these children as they come into, as they develop. And so continuing our journey, we go to Africa, which Africa is faced with varying, to say Africa and to pretend that I can say this is the way Africa is that's not what I'm attempting to do. Each one of these is attempt just to be a short little view of what does play look like, as opposed to a comprehensive analysis of the situation in each country. But as I looked at Africa, which the greatest threat to play in Africa is poverty throughout the continent, I found that although there is poverty, it seems as if there is a belief that each child is unique and deserves the chance to grow and develop away from oppression. And although it might not look like it from a Western, this is one thing that I found. Oftentimes African play was described as deficit in some way, and I would propose actually that oftentimes it's because the people who were doing the observation were from a Western standpoint, and perhaps it just looked different than what they might be expecting. So for instance, like the lack of plastic toys to a mindset like mine might indicate not a rich play environment, whereas that might not exactly be true. Going on, we go to Italy, where Italy has a long history of early childhood development theorists. Possibly the most famous is Maria Montessori, who believed that, perhaps falsely, she believed that play was the work of children's lives, but we have to give her kudos for her emphasis on allowing children to play, whatever her reason for it was. And this has actually permeated throughout Italian culture, and it seems as if adults enjoy play, adults enjoy playing with children, and this was actually the only country in my study where I found that there was actually an emphasis on adults taking time for purposeful leisure. So that's why I sum it up by saying, live to play, play for life. Now this was perhaps one of the most interesting that I found in my study. So this is from a Polynesian island. And the way that play evidenced itself here was that children between the ages of 2 and 5 actually functioned as a virtually autonomous play group with very, very little adult interaction. And for instance, in one study day, which was norm for the study, they found there were only 2 interactions between an adult and the play group. And keep in mind, this is a play group of between 12 and 20 children, the ages between 2 and 5. And so from basically in the morning to at night, they played independently. They played down at the docks, they played with garbage, and interestingly enough, you would expect there to be lots of drownings, there was very, very, very little actual injury to the children. And so the social order within these playgroups was enforced by the members, which there's very, very set roles for the older children and all that. I won't go into all that. But basically, it was this form of play, as I found, play is very culturally specific and helps the child to enter into society once they become adults. Now, I would not say that that is the function of play. That is just an outgrowth of it. So in this particular culture, it seemed that play was very important for the development of self-regulated individuals with rights and responsibilities within the community. Because in this Marquesan culture, it was very important that you be yourself, but that you are part of the community. So just to go on, and so in Taiwan, this is a quote from Confucius that guided child rearing practices for many, many years. So this quote says, "Let the will be set on the path of duty. Let every attainment in what is good be firmly grasped. Let perfect virtue be accorded with. Let relaxation and enjoyment be found in the play arts." So this view actually kind of leads to an interesting way that play evidences itself, because there's an emphasis that play is important, but there's also a belief almost that the child can't do it on its own. And so it seems as if in this culture it was very important that children be allowed to play, but that adults facilitate proper play so that they can develop the skills that they viewed as necessary. So going on to India, now India, just like Africa, is so diverse. There's a billion people, you can't, but just to, there were great divisions in how play evidenced itself depending on socioeconomic status. But one thing that I found throughout was that there is starting to be because in India, the lower socioeconomic status people oftentimes viewed the child as a little adult, whereas the middle class and higher class socioeconomic people often viewed the child as an active, it was a child. It was an active participant in its own development, and they allowed for many possibilities for children to play, whereas in the lower socioeconomic status, there was not that kind of opportunity due to poverty and also due to view of the child. So that's why I sum it up by saying there's new ways of thinking, but old societal structures still are in place that are very much influencing play. Now the U.S., once again, we are huge. It's impossible to limit this. But here, our play is very much about celebrating diversity, individuality, and democracy. You'll oftentimes, and adults will intervene in play groups in America to make sure these values are upheld. So you'll often see a parent make sure he's getting his fair share, make sure all that. And so that is very important in our play groups here in the United States. So now, leaving our global travel and just looking specifically at how does play look in different situations, I mentioned that I looked at orphanages, hospitals, refugee camps, and concentration camps. And what I found was that play increases children's ability to cope with pain, difficult realities, and tragic situations. Just to talk about one study real briefly, what they did was they took some children who, I believe they were diabetic, so they were often having to get stuck. And what they did was they allowed the child to play with a doll and a fake syringe before getting stuck. And they found that they actually reported less pain after they were stuck when they were allowed to play with the doll beforehand. And then to just talk about the children in difficult realities and tragic situations, there's actually a wealth of information about children playing in concentration camps. To speak about one, the name of the camp at the moment is escaping me, but there was a woman who was, unfortunately, you heard, Friedel. No, it doesn't matter, but she was an artist and a teacher, and she was in the concentration camp, Terezin. And one thing to note, 15,000 children went through this concentration camp, only 132 came out. And in this camp, this woman, along with many of the other adults, they saw that these children need opportunities for play, they need opportunities for expression, so she taught secretly art classes, education classes, and allowed the children opportunities for play. And what they found is that there was value in the children's play, not only for the child, but also for the adults who watched the children at play. So they actually observed that the inmates in the concentration camp sometimes actually physically improved by participating in the children's play. They had physical improvement, which leads me to what I spoke about earlier as play as a form of logotherapy. Now, Viktor Frankl posited the theory that many of our psychological stresses and, in fact, physical infirmities stem from we don't know what our meaning is in our lives. Freud posited that it was, this pleasure principle, but Frankl said that it was that we do not know what our meaning is. And so this is a quote from Sheehan that says, "In play you realize simultaneously the supreme importance and utter insignificance of what you are doing. You accept the paradox of pursuing what is at once essential and inconsequential. Play, then, is the answer to the puzzle of our existence." So this goes to the heart of what I'm saying, which is that we need to allow children to play so that they can be healthy adults. I truly believe that when we deny children the access to play, they are not given the opportunity to develop cognitively and in all the areas of development that I mentioned. And so when you allow a child this opportunity for play, we might be able to alleviate some of the problems of adulthood. And so this is a picture of my daughter, Scarlett. And this is a quote that I absolutely love, and just to leave us with it to think about. Because children grow up, we think a child's purpose is to grow up. But a child's purpose is to be a child. Nature doesn't disdain what lives only for a day. It pours the whole of itself into each moment. We don't value the lily less for not being made of flint and built to last. Life's bounty is in its flow. Later is too late. And so I just want to leave you with that thought and this beautiful picture of my daughter, and I wanted to thank you for your time. Thank you.